Hey there, welcome to Livewire. I'm your host, Luke Burbank. This week, we have a very special Women's History Month episode of the show for you, starting with a conversation with Emmy-nominated writer and comedian Jamie Loftus talking about Aack Cast, which is her hit podcast about the Cathy cartoon and why she thinks the character of Cathy didn't really get a fair shake. Then we're going to talk to Silvia Vasquez-Lavado. She's the first openly gay woman to climb the 7 summits, which would be the highest mountain on each continent. And yes, that's as hard as it sounds like it would be. Then we're going to catch up with legendary indie musician and activist Ani DiFranco. Ani is even going to play a song for us, so you know, life goal unlocked for me. We're hoping you make it your life goal to stick around for this week's episode of Livewire, because it's going to be a good one. It all gets started right after this. Hey, it's Luke. You know, from time to time, I like to recommend a podcast that I'm getting into, and I think you might really like the Pitchfork Review. It comes to you from the folks over at Pitchfork, and it's a show for music fans and obsessives who sort of can't wait to talk about the latest releases. It's co-hosted by editor-in-chief Pooja Patel and reviews editor Jeremy D. Larson. It features guest critics and contributors, and it pulls back the curtain on how Pitchfork writes reviews and scores, and it dives deep into new music, gives an expert guide to what's exciting, what's great, and what's actually just terrible. From debating whether the 1975's new album sounds more like Lionel Richie or Huey Lewis, or exploring Beck's otherworldly soundscapes, it's a level of insight and, yeah, sometimes snark, which is also what Pitchfork is known for. There are new episodes of the Pitchfork Review released every Thursday. You can listen and follow now wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, Elena.
Hey, Luke. How's it going?
Going great. Are you ready to play a little station location identification examination?
Oh, yeah.
Station location identification examination is where I give Elena a little quiz about a place in the country where we are on the radio, and she's got to guess where I'm talking about. I feel like you're going to get this one. I'm trying to think of a hint that will extend it a little bit. How about this one? This is going back a ways. In 1926, Bertha Knight Landis became the mayor of this city. She was the first woman to be elected as mayor in a major American city. We're talking women's history this week, so that's an appropriate hint, but also a little bit of an obscure fact.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be one of those ones where, like, the husband dies and then the wife becomes the mayor, like it happens with Texas governors all the time.
I think this was a little less nepotistic than that. Let me give you another hint. This city is home to American writer and author of So You Want to Talk About Race, friend of the program, Ijeoma Oluo.
Seattle, Washington.
Ding, ding, ding.
Amazing.
And KUOW, where we're on in Seattle, 94.9 FM, one of our very favorite stations. Some of the best folks out there tuning in from Seattle, including a large contingent of my actual family. So shout out to everyone tuning in from Seattle. Should we get to the show?
Let's do it.
All right, take it away.
From PRX, it's... This week, comedian and writer Jamie Loftus.
I just remember that there was this one comic strip in the newspaper that my mom thought was funny, my dad thought was awful, and I didn't understand 1%.
And writer and mountain climber Silvia Vasquez-Lavado.
I never saw climbing as a way of conquering. You know, the very first time I came across the Himalayas, I felt a safety. I felt a sense of belonging.
With music from Ani DiFranco and our fabulous house band. I'm your announcer, Elena Passarello, and now the host of Livewire, Luke Burbank.
Hey, thank you so much, Elena Passarello. Thanks to everyone tuning in from all over the country, including KUOW in Seattle, 94.9 FM. We have a great show in store for you this week. We are celebrating women's history in honor of Women's History Month. And we have a listener question that we asked about in honor of that as well, which is what unsung or undersung hero from women's history would you like to shout out? People have been sending in those responses. We're going to hear those coming up in just a minute on the show. First, though, let's jump right in with our first guest on this special edition of the show. She's an Emmy-nominated writer who's also the host and creator of 4 critically acclaimed podcasts, which the New York Times described as unexpectedly gripping explorations of niche subjects. We talked to her about her podcast, Aack Cast, which explores the unlikely feminist icon Cathy. That's right, from the comic strip Cathy. The show was named the #1 podcast of the year by Vulture back in 2021. Take a listen to our conversation with Jamie Loftus, recorded live at the Alberta Rose Theatre in Portland. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we had you on the show a while ago talking about your really incredible podcast, Lolita Podcast. And now I want to talk a little bit about this Aack Cast, which is about the comic Cathy, which I'm a bit older than you, but I think, like you describe your experience in the podcast, you grew up at a time where really the idea of this Cathy comic was just something to sort of make fun of, or as you say in the show, dunk on. And I have to say, I went into this listening experience feeling the same way, but I came out of it with a totally different sense of where Cathy fits into the culture. What got you interested in her?
I think that I reflect on things I glossed over as a kid quite a bit. And I grew up kind of, at the tail end of newspaper comics being kind of a daily or weekly ritual. And I just remember that there was this one comic strip in the newspaper that my mom thought was funny, my dad thought was awful, and I didn't understand 1%. Because it was a comic strip for adult women, and there was no one else kind of making something like that. So me as a kid, I was like, I don't understand why taxes are stressful, and I don't understand the wage gap. But there was a huge audience for it, and it's an audience that at that time was all of these kind of legitimate concerns that were like put in this very comedic way were made to seem silly. When reflecting on it now, the jokes are still funny, and a lot of the jokes hold up. But the concerns are ones that I now have as an adult, because it turns out taxes do suck. And there is a wage gap.
What do you think people don't understand about the complexity of the Cathy character when they think it's just someone who's a chocoholic and yells "ack" a lot?
Well, all those things are true, I will say. She does say "ack" and she does love chocolate.
She also has a lot of sex, as you mentioned, and you use a different word for it on the show.
Yes, and I know that I'm not going to use it here, but you know the one I'm thinking of, and she does it all the time. And you can't do that in the newspaper, but it's like heavily implied. I'm like, oh, she's like dating, and it's lasting for a while. Like, she's doing it, you know? And she's doing it well, I would imagine. I mean, she was like a very complex woman who was kind of coming into adulthood in the 70s and 80s. And so she was very much engaging with all of these second wave feminist ideas that I honestly didn't know very much about. And I think, with every wave of social movements, feminism included, there is a honest and I think very legitimate impulse to kind of dunk on your predecessors in some ways, because they were not as progressive as they should have been. And there are people who, and many women who were erased from that movement that need that called out. And then also, if they hadn't done the work they had done, then we wouldn't be where we are now. And so the Cathy comic strips became this very bizarre, specific way to engage with that idea. And also, just find a woman who was very privileged in some ways, but in other ways had to start a whisper network at her own job in the 80s in order to thrive in the newspaper column. Like it was just kind of this very bizarre way to learn more about kind of what my own mom and aunts went through.
And your mom is in the podcast.
My mom is in the podcast, and now she and the author of the Cathy comics, Cathy Guyswhite, are friends. Cathy Guyswhite is truly if she feels like a second mom to me now. She's been so supportive and so kind throughout this whole process, which I don't know if I would be able to give someone the same amount of grace that she gave me in making that show. She was so awesome. And she, in a very Cathy way, recently sent my mom an edible arrangement and was like, hey, thank you for raising Jamie. And then my mom sent her an edible arrangement back and was like, thank you for being nice to Jamie. And then Cathy sent an edible arrangement back.
Wait. So we're at 3 edible arrangements. That's what's keeping that business in business? Because I have never been able to figure out who's sending those things. It's your mom and Cathy.
It's a tennis game of them sending old pineapple back and forth to each other. And at this point, I'm just a third party. I'm the referee. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
There's only really one character from the sort of Cathy universe that you have just unalloyed distaste for, and it would be her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Irving.
Garbage. Garbage. Yeah. Irving, bad. No sympathy for Irving. No.
What is it about Irving's character that you find so detestable?
What isn't it about Irving's character that I find disgusting? No, I mean, in some ways, I understand he's got a lot of internalized self-hatred. He's got a lot of internalized misogyny. And he's very like upwardly mobile boomer guy in that he has no recognition of his own privilege and he's constantly buying gadgets and won't shut up about it. It's just like, he's just like all of my worst uncles bundled into one cartoon character. And he has no recognition for Cathy, this amazing woman who loves him. And there's all of these moments. I mean, and the more that I read about Irving, the more that I disliked him in specific ways. Because, you know, Cathy would go to therapy and he'd be like, I can't believe you'd work on yourself, Cathy. And it's like, look in the mirror, sir. Like, he was just an infuriating character top to bottom.
Well, you also mentioned in the podcast, he was Ted Bundy's favorite comic character.
Yes, that was mentioned in, I believe it was Ted Bundy's prison correspondence that he mentioned being a big fan of Irving and rooting for him, which is all you need to know.
Yeah.
I'd call that a red flag.
Yeah, Irving isn't known for like his stands, but his main stand was a famous murderer.
This is Livewire from PRX. We're listening to a conversation we recorded with the comedian Jamie Loftus about her podcast, Aack Cast, talking about the Cathy comic strip. Now, we've got to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, because when we get back, we're going to hear Jamie's take on why it is that Cathy will not give up in the face of career trouble and lame boyfriends and the like. Don't go anywhere. More Livewire with Jamie Loftus in just a minute. Livewire is brought to you in part by Alaska Airlines. Alaska Airlines offers the most nonstops from the West Coast, including destinations like Hawaii, Costa Rica, and Belize. And as a member of the One World Alliance, Alaska Airlines can connect you to more than 1,000 destinations worldwide with their global partners. Learn more at alaskaair.com. Welcome back to Livewire from PRX. I'm your host, Luke Burbank, here with Elena Passarello, and we are listening to a conversation with comedian Jamie Loftus talking about her podcast, Aack Cast, about the Cathy cartoon character. As we celebrate women's history this week on the show, take a listen. When you're sort of summing up what you've learned in your sort of time with this whole idea of Cathy and talking to the creator, Cathy Geiswhite, you said you really think that this is a sort of long-term meditation on effort and failure. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the case of the Cathy comics, what you come up against time and time again with this character is she wants more for herself. She wants to be upwardly mobile in her career. She wants to be paid equally. She wants to, quote unquote, have it all in the way we see all of these characters who are women struggle with throughout, multiple generations. And repeatedly in the Cathy comics, she's told no, and doors are slammed in her face, but she keeps trying. And I feel like that is very much, in many ways, the story of every generation of women, but to see it specifically put in my mom's generation was so enlightening, where it was, like my mom and many women of that generation had the same issues of knowing their worth and learning their worth and doing the work on themselves, and still having, for all these various reasons societally, doors slammed in their face, whether it was in personal relationships with the Irvings of the world who were not realizing their worth and refusing to work on themselves, or whether it was bosses who wouldn't pay them for what they were worth, or whatever it was. It was this story of, again and again, realizing like, I am worth something. The world doesn't recognize that, but I have to do what I can to hold on to that. And now, as I get older myself, it's a lesson that unfortunately is still very important to hold on to. And I didn't appreciate or understand it when I first encountered the Cathy comics, and now I'm just like, wow, she was really onto something. I wish that the lessons weren't so applicable still, but it turns out that is the history of women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jamie Loftus, everyone, right here on Livewire. That was Jamie Loftus right here on Livewire. Now, Elena, since we recorded that conversation with Jamie, she has been very busy, really raising the question, what am I doing with my life? Of course, you can get Aack Cast, which we were just talking about. She also released a new limited series podcast. It's called Ghost Church. Ooh. And it explores grief and the tradition of kind of communing with the dead. Also, mediums are mentioned on the show. So check that out. And then also, I've got this book actually here at my house. Jamie has a book coming out in May called Raw Dog, The Naked Truth About Hot Dogs. And she's actually going to be on the show to tell us all about it. So make sure you check out what Jamie has been getting up to. Hey, special thanks this week to Josh O'Rourke of Portland, Oregon, and Manuel Galaviz of Vancouver, Washington. Josh and Manuel are part of the Livewire member community, and they are generously supporting the show with a donation each month, which is a very big deal to us because it's the only way we're able to keep doing this. So, Josh and Manuel, thank you for keeping Livewire going. You're listening to Livewire. Of course, each week we ask our listeners a question. Since we're celebrating women's history this week, we asked our listeners, what unsung or undersung hero from women's history would you like to shout out? Elena has been collecting those up. What are you seeing?
I have had the best time learning from all these listener suggestions, all these unsung heroes. I literally didn't know any of the people that we're going to talk about today, starting with Susan's suggestion of Bridget Biddy Mason. Bridget Mason was born into slavery in Georgia, and she went with the people that enslaved her to Utah for the Mormon migration, and then to California. And when she got to California, she was already a mom. And in a landmark trial, she won her freedom, and she won freedom for her family. It was a huge deal. This was in 1856. Then she went on to become one of the richest women in L.A.
You go.
I know. She was known as Grandma Mason. She started as a physician's assistant and a midwife. She bought a bunch of property and then used she had like the equivalent of like $7 million today. She used her wealth to establish a daycare center for working parents like in the 19th century.
That is so ahead of its time.
I know. She created an account at a store where families who were victims of a big flood could get supplies. She also co-founded and financed the first African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is still going strong in Los Angeles.
Wow.
An amazing person. And my life is so much richer now that I know about Grandma Biddy Mason.
I lived in LA for a long time, and I'd never heard that story of Biddy Mason. So shout out to her. That's pretty amazing. All right. What's another undersung hero that we want to hear about on this week's show?
Okay, we were talking a little bit about lady mayors in the beginning of the episode.
Sure.
Have you ever heard of Laura Starcher?
I don't think I have.
Kristen told me about Laura Starcher. In 1916, Laura Starcher and a bunch of other women in Umatilla, Oregon, ran a stealth write-in campaign and overturned the male city council and the mayor's office. But here's the trick. Laura Starcher started a write-in campaign and was elected mayor and beat her own husband.
Wow.
Along with a bunch of other people on the council. And the news stories sort of brought a lot of national news in kind of an amusement way. Like they thought it was this funny novelty. They called it, this was in like 1916, the petticoat government. But they actually got some stuff done. They improved water and electrical services. They approved funds for streets and sidewalk projects. They made new railroad crossing signs. They founded a library. They replaced all the city's American flags. When the smallpox epidemic happened in 1918, they appointed a health official. And a lot of women stayed in those positions for years and years and years. And when Laura Starcher left, she was replaced by another woman as the mayor of Umatilla.
Who'd have known?
It's amazing.
That's incredible. Okay, one last undersung hero from women's history that we want to find out about this week.
Oh, I have to tell you about Eva Jesse, who Karen brought to my attention. Eva Jesse was born at the turn of the century, and she was an American musical conductor, a choral conductor, the first Black woman to receive any international distinction as a choral conductor. And she's known as one of the main choral conductors and choral group leaders of the Harlem Renaissance. She worked with Virgil Thompson and Gertrude Stein. She was the musical director for the first productions of Porgy and Bess in 1935, and her choral group was the official choir for the Freedom March in the 1960s. So she's a real icon of American musical history, vocal musical history, and just a real groundbreaking legend. And I'm so happy to learn about her as well.
I think I said this on the show last week, but this is the second year that we've done this when we're talking about women's history and asked the listeners to tell us about some folks we might not have heard of. And I feel like this is a almost inexhaustible resource because there are so many people, so many women who were not thought of during their time. And so we can probably do this for the next 10 years of Livewire and learn something each year. So, all right, this is Livewire Radio. Our next guest is an explorer in more ways than one. She was raised in Peru. She then navigated her way to the highest echelons of Silicon Valley before realizing that she really couldn't outrun her own childhood trauma. So what did she do? Well, she started climbing, specifically mountains. She climbed Everest, Kilimanjaro, and a bunch of others, becoming the first openly gay woman to climb what are known as the 7 summits. That's like the tallest mountain on every continent. Her latest book is In the Shadow of the Mountain, and we talked to her in front of a live audience at the Alberta Rhodes Theater in Portland, Oregon. Take a listen to this. It's our conversation with Silvia Vasquez-Lavado.
Wow.
Silvia, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. This is so exciting. Thank you very much, Portland. Thank you.
This book covers really the span of your life up till now, but let's kind of start in San Francisco in the early 2000s because you're living there, and by a lot of outward indications, you're doing pretty well. Doing great at work, you have a lot of relationships, or let's be honest, a lot of hookups.
Yes, I did.
You're a very popular person.
Yes.
Your life seems to be going okay, but what was really going on in your life at that time?
Well, I was secretly dealing with addiction. I was a full-rage alcoholic, and very few people knew how many times I had been evicted and how many times I had ended up on the ER. And my life was spiraling out of control, especially because I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and the emotion, the shame, the trauma had chased me in my 20s, and I literally was spiraling out. But on the facade, that I had a stable job that I seemed to be able to go to fun places and hip places was a way of hiding just the amount of pain and the amount of self-destruction that I was causing myself. So,
you grew up in a, I guess you say, an upper middle class family in Peru?
Yes.
So you grew up with resources, but it was also a family that was full of secrets, including some people that you thought were your cousins that were actually your siblings because your mother had given birth to them earlier, but then was sort of kept from seeing them. What was that story?
It was very unfortunate. My father, was a little older than my mom, and he was raised in a very conservative way, very patriarchal way, and he was very possessive. And so when he got together with my mother, he gave her a choice. You can get together with me, but you have to let go of your children. Yet, my mother, as any woman, she found a way of trying to see her children and trying to be part of their lives. And unfortunately, she entrusted me at the house with a person that she thought that, she can count on, who ended up being my abuser. And so every time she would sneak out to be with my siblings, I was experiencing the abuse. And what was really hard growing up is that we would only get together on Mother's Day or on Christmas. And, my older siblings, they were known as my cousins, and they were so loving and so kind. And, I remember just always being, close to them, but not knowing what the secret was until ultimately it unraveled.
What was that like for you when you actually found out that these were your actual brothers and sisters?
I think for me was confusion. And even by the time that I found out, that they were my real siblings, I was already experiencing the abuse. My parents had a very violent relationship. And then on top of this, we were having the birth of a terrorist movement in Peru. So there was a lot of hyperinflation. There was a lot of chaos around my life. And so for me, I was trying to, find answers. I was trying to get to the truth. And if anything, I kind of was surprised, almost like, wow, I have other siblings. And then understanding the complexities of, the drama that my father's way of being created was ultimately very hurtful.
How old were you when you realized that what you were going through in adulthood was related to what had happened in your childhood?
Well, I came to this country trying to outrun my past. I actually, if anything, I came to the States with a scholarship, and it was almost like escape. When I told my mother what had happened to me, and I unfortunately didn't tell her until I was 15, so I went from the ages of 10 to 15 on my own, pretty much blaming myself, that, she took me to a psychiatrist. They did a bunch of tests, and they were like, I think she's better off leaving the country. And so for me, it was like, okay, coming to America, a way to start new. I remember, seeing 90210 and feeling that, life in the States is going to be perfect. And, so I ended up going to the Amish country in Pennsylvania. So that
Yes.
So great in the book when you show up at the Philadelphia airport and you're like, hello, I am Silvia and I'm from Peru and
Yes.
I'm going to college, and you find your way to the Amish country.
It's one of my favorite lines. It's like, hello, I'm Silvia from Peru and I'm going to Millersville University of Pennsylvania. And they're like, wait, what? And and I figured University of Pennsylvania, Millersville University of Pennsylvania. It should be like an annex or something close. But yeah, definitely was a very unique start in life in America.
This is Livewire Radio. We are talking to Silvia Vasquez-Lavado about her book, In the Shadow of the Mountain. When did the idea first enter your head to try to climb Mount Everest?
Well, I call myself an accidental mountaineer. I come from a country that is known by its gorgeous mountain ranges, but it never appealed to me. We always saw it as only the toughest of the tough could do it. And I even remember, I think one of the very few trips that we did with my family, we went to El Huascarán, and we tried to take a family photo in a boulder, and it was a 5-foot boulder, and I freaked out. And I had a massive meltdown, and from then I was curious, I'm never trying that. But it was interesting because my life was spiraling out of control. I already had gotten a DUI, I had been sent to jail, and that hadn't stopped me. And I hit a point in which my baby brother found me passed out at the entrance of my home. And it felt that I had been, I couldn't hide anymore. So I asked for help, and I told my mom, I need help. She's like, come down to Peru. You're going to do something that your cousin is going to help you with. It's called ayahuasca. And so my mother was a very conservative woman. We'll go to church, and so I'm like, okay, we're going to do ayahuasca. First of
This
all,
was, by the way, the most wholesome ayahuasca, most family-oriented ayahuasca trip of all time. They pick you up, they take you out to the place. Everyone's like, we're really rooting for Silvia with this out-of-body experience.
I mean, well, who does ayahuasca with their parents? I mean, it is very interesting. But so that was quite unique. And so, of course, I'm feeling, I mean, like many of us, I'm just like, okay, great. I'm going to have a vision of the people that are causing all this damage in my life, because I wasn't ready to really admit that myself. So I'm just like, okay, let me see, who am I going to see? Who are all those negative forces? And I'm doing the ayahuasca, and the very first person that appears is me as a little girl. The little girl that I had ignored through all my years that I had run away from Peru, the life that I had wanted to disappear. And so I see her fragility, and all she wanted was reconnection with my adult self. And so I remember embracing her and feeling that wholesomeness, and there was something powerful. And as we're doing this, then I hear this rumbling around us, and these mountains took shape. And my little girl grabs my hand and starts taking me into mountains. And so that was a powerful vision that I had on this episode with ayahuasca. And so I'm a Virgo. I can be very square. And I figured, you know what? Why don't I could have looked at it and being like the metaphor of life, walk the mountains, of life with my little girl. But I'm like, no. Let's put this into action. And I'm like, if I need to bring this massive pain, why don't I bring it to the most massive mountain in the world? Why don't I walk to the base of Everest? And of course, I never had done anything like that. I had never, hiked before. I didn't have any of the gear. But there was something powerful about how that vision came from something so sacred and so innocent of me that I figured, I have nothing to lose. So, I just did what any normal person would do. I decided to attempt to just walk to the base of Everest.
We're talking to Silvia Vasquez-Lavado here on Livewire. The book is In the Shadow of the Mountain. So, then you've gone on to have this incredible kind of mountaineering career and established this record of being the first openly gay woman to climb the 7 summits. What do you think has made you so good at mountaineering from such an inauspicious start of not wanting to get on that boulder?
Yeah, I think, there are a couple of things. First of all, I never saw climbing as a way of conquering. The very first time I came across the Himalayas, I felt a safety. I felt a sense of belonging that I had never experienced in my life. And something completely just broke. Any darkness that I had kind of felt that I was being held. And that's what it is, almost like my shadow. All those secrets, all that pain was nothing in comparison to the power of the mountain. And so the way that I've taken into climbing has always been as a way of reverence, of respect, of actually connection. And so that takes away from me, the pressure of ego. I always say I don't conquer anything, because when you are in these massive mountains, we're so tiny. First of all, these things have been in formation for millions of years. We're just passing by. So, we're going to conquer who? The mountain is looking at us going oh, really? I'm going to put a little storm and you're going to be blowing off the mountain. So there is a sense of me of humility that I come through this. And I think that has allowed me to almost feel as if I'm going in a temple. And it makes the experience very fulfilling. And what I've really enjoyed is the opportunity of getting to know myself more. I was going through this, and I learned from the very early start that you can't do this while drunk, because, it's a little bit your vision is quite impaired.
So you tried that?
One of those things is you get a headache, and you're like, oh my God, what am I throwing up? But if anything, mountains kept me safe, and mountains kind of saved my life.
Do you think physically, though, you have some kind of gift, whether it's lung capacity or just tenacity? Because, a lot of people have tried these things that you have done, and they've quit, and you didn't. Is that just sheer willpower? What do you attribute that to?
I think stubbornness, I will call it.
You are a Virgo, as you reveal.
Yes. I think it's stubbornness. It's actually just a perseverance. It's a curiosity. What I get in mountains, in nature, is awe. And it is proven that 3 days in nature starts rewiring of the brain. So most of these expeditions, usually go over a week. And because I have found so much inspiration and safety that, by the 4th day, I'm kind of connected. And it's almost like, the curiosity about, let's see how far we can go.
Are you just unfazed now by pooping outside? It's in the book, by the way.
I call myself the woman who shit her pants. So and I'm proud of saying that. But yeah, I look at it as a new kind of comfort. So
Now, even after you climbed Everest, you were still actively drinking.
Yes, I was.
So how was it that you came back from that intense experience and were like, but I am still going to rely on this drug to try to alter my kind of feelings?
Well, the amount of euphoria, especially after a lot of the summits, there was a sense of celebration. And of course, there was a way of you just have all this adrenaline and it'll be like, how to do it. And it is great that we finished the book at the top of Everest because if people would know coming down, I still had I partied for 3 days. And that's, but the beauty, now I've been 4 years sober. But
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I think at the time, for me, I felt that I still had control over my drinking. So even after coming back and partying, I felt like, well, I've done this amazing thing, and maybe a little celebration. Let me give myself a little time to, good job for doing this, for exposing my life. My year after climbing Everest, on my anniversary, I ended up having a bike accident. I ended up on the ICU, and the doctors found a brain tumor. They couldn't determine if it was cancerous or benign for a couple of days. My mother had died of cancer, so I'm and we've had it in the family. So I told myself, well, it could be my time to go. And the very first thing that came into my life was gratitude. I remember being like, God, I've had such an amazing life with all the ups and downs. I've seen some of the most beautiful sunrises, sunsets. I've seen this uninhibited dawn. And I figured well, if it's my time to go, I'll quit my job tomorrow and I'll spend the rest of my time trying to work with young girls, trying to climb and trying to share my story. So I remember putting myself a little bit of purpose, yet I still had to finish that last mountain, which was Denali. And after I was done with it, I remember I came down and I had a bad episode of drinking. And I just told myself, okay, you just completed this thing. It's either one more drink or your life. And so I decided to take, a closer look to my addiction and to figure, okay, where is the pain? And a dear friend of mine recommended me to take these incredible classes on compassion, like self-compassion. And that completely changed my life. And it actually allowed me to start walking my talk. And I felt, okay, now if I want to be able to share my story, and if I want to be able to do it in a vulnerable way that I can even walk my talk, I need to face this demon, for once and for all. And it's been one of the most beautiful gifts. And so writing this book has truly saved my life in that way.
Wow. A lot of this book, a lot of the parts about the trauma have to do with secrecy in your family and also you feeling this tremendous sense of shame and trying to keep secrets together, whether it was the trauma that you went through as a child or your drinking or what have you. Was climbing Mount Everest or was climbing the 7 summits more difficult than putting all of that information into this book that now, lots and lots of people are going to read and hear about?
Kind of reliving pretty much the book was the hardest thing. First of all, I hadn't opened I hadn't opened a lot of those experiences. And I was doing it while sober. And so there was no word for me to hide. And that's the one thing I'm so proud about the book. It's almost like I think I overshared too much. My family's not too happy. But for me, it was somebody needed to say things that sometimes we don't want to say. And being able to bring out shame and secrecy out of the shadows and put it out there. So it was really tough. But, I knew, this is a book that I wish I would have read after getting out of one of the ER sessions. I wish I would have been able to find a story of somebody who was that vulnerable and that open. And so that's something that has filled me with pride. It was hard, but I had a lot of help. I had my therapy, and I love that And one of my biggest realizations is how much information we store in our bodies.
Sure.
It is amazing when if we're really committed to trying to find out, things that maybe have caused a lot of pain in us, the information is in us. And actually, it made me really sad to see, how much self-destruction I was doing to myself.
Well, it's amazing to hear what you've come through, and I think it's really kind of inspirational to other people who've experienced trauma in their life. I'm wondering, would you say the takeaway from this book is that everyone should do ayahuasca?
Yes. Everybody should do ayahuasca? No. But no, the reality, I think, is, this is a story, even though it comes across as a mountaineering story, it is a story of all of us. We all have experienced shame, a little bit of, loss, grief, addiction. And there's a lot of aspects. This is a book that reflects a lot of our different stages. And the biggest invitation is, I know by the time you finish this book, you're going to be inspired to kind of ask yourself, okay, so what's my next, what's my inner mountain? What's my outer mountain? What it is beautiful about the whole story within the book, it's almost like this beautiful healing circle. It's a combination of common humanity, how the power of all of us being able to heal in community, how when we're willing to hear our stories, and especially just even being willing to take a walk in nature, the power and the transformative experience that we can all do. It's a roller coaster ride that people are really going to enjoy.
The book is In the Shadow of the Mountain. Silvia Vasquez-Lavado, thanks for coming on Livewire.
Thank you so much.
That was Silvia Vasquez-Lavado right here on Livewire. Her incredible book, In the Shadow of the Mountain, is available now. I'm Luke Burbank here with Elena Passarello. We've got to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere because we will be right back with, I can't believe I'm getting to say this, Ani DiFranco. Ani's going to be talking about making music, also releasing 22 albums on her own label, which she started when she was 19 years old. And we're going to hear a song as well. So stick around. Lots of Livewire still to come. Welcome back to Livewire from PRX. I'm Luke Burbank, here with Elena Passarello. All right, our musical guest this hour is nothing short of a legend. She's a Grammy winner, feminist icon. Her latest album, Revolutionary Love, is her 22nd album that she released on her record label, Righteous Babe Records. We talked to Ani DiFranco from her home studio in New Orleans during the pandemic. Take a listen to this. Ani DiFranco, welcome to the Livewire House Party.
Woohoo! Thanks for having me.
I was surprised when I was doing a little research on you that you founded Righteous Babe Records when you were like 20.
Yeah.
That's incredible to me. And how do you think that shaped the arc of your career, that you've been basically in charge of your own albums for all these years and not, at the behest of some label? And you must have turned down what felt like a ton of money in your early life to go this on your own.
Yeah. Well, one will never know the extent of the money or exposure or this or that I turned down, because such are the choices, the path not taken. So I have only myself to blame, for all the mistakes I've made. And I prefer it that way. I think in a lot of ways it would have been awesome to have the team of professionals helping me translate what I do, helping me reach people with what I do, all of that. But in another way, I was freer, and my records, though they might not be as polished or constructed, for radio or whatever, or maximum sort of reaching the biggest audience, they are very real.
Yeah.
They're very much like whatever trip I was on at the time, so there's a deep honesty going on, if nothing else.
I think also that very real and honest nature of your songwriting is why your fans really connect with you, like really. And I can only imagine that feels great, but it's also sometimes a lot of, as we now say, emotional labor for you to have a whole bunch of people who feel really strongly about this stuff that you've created. What is it like to have that kind of connection with a bunch of people, many of whom you haven't even met?
Well, it's intense. It is intense. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. It can be too much. But I wouldn't trade it. It's a wonderful problem to have, really. Having people that I've never met feel they know me, feel they love me, even though, it really is a beautiful thing. And it makes sense to me because, like we've been talking about, I've been so naked in my songs and in my shows and in my records that I'm not hiding anything, really. So, yes, you do know me. I don't know you back necessarily, person that's, in my face now, hugging and hyperventilating. But it is still just, even when it's overwhelming, like I said, I wouldn't trade it. It's so important just to feel I've connected with people. I've bared myself and I've put so much out there, and to feel that it's connected and maybe even helped, maybe uplifted, maybe affirmed somebody else's existence. That's my reward right there.
You're someone who was known for being very progressive and really bringing up a lot of conversations in your music that other people weren't at the time. I'm curious what it's like for you, though, to still be learning at this point in your career, because I can see, and I'm guilty of this myself, if one intends to be someone who really is inclusive and thinks about other people's experiences, it's also kind of mind-blowing to realize you weren't doing it right. I don't mean you specifically, but we people weren't doing it right for all these years that we thought we were doing our best.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? Growing, listening, staying engaged with people, continuing to learn more about what you don't know. Because how could you? You know your experience. I know mine. You know yours. So, I mean, the only thing that scares me these days is that we sometimes don't give each other license to not know everything, to not be born into ultimate consciousness, to be on a learning journey. I certainly, like you said, I've been on one my whole life, and I honestly don't know how I would have fared this journey if I'd been born into the age of social media, I don't know how a young person who wants to do as I've done, sort of push the envelope, step out, try, like you said, try to challenge society, try to speak to their own truth, to what they see. And that involves making mistakes. And so I feel terrified for young people who want to be that agent of change and challenging and stepping out and taking risks now. I feel very much for the young and intrepid. I wish them well. I hope that we, can come back around to this idea that it's not about being right. It's about being in it. And continuing to learn and say, I know more than I did yesterday. And maybe even to say sorry for what I did or said yesterday.
What song are we going to hear?
Oh, gee whiz. I thought I'd play you simultaneously.
This is the latest single off of your album, Revolutionary Love?
That is correct.
This is Ani DiFranco here on the Livewire House Party.
Different worlds simultaneously. The one I seem to live in, and the one that lives in me. And one is full of violence, oppression, and disrespect. And one is full of longing to breathe and to connect. Yes, my inner world is fragile, and the outer world is done. And this whole thing is such a hassle. Won't you wake me when it's done? I live in two different worlds simultaneously. The one where we are fractured and the one where we are free. Yeah, freedom requires safety. Yeah, freedom requires trust. Yeah, freedom requires balance in the equation of us. Yes, my inner world is fragile and the outer world is dumb. And this whole thing is such a hassle. Won't you wake me when it's done? When it's done. 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 I live in two different worlds simultaneously, and between them is a chasm unfolding unfathomably, and in that chasm a shadow, and in that shadow I stand facing towards the light. Nothing in my hands. Yes, my inner world is fragile and the outer world is done. And this whole thing is such a hassle. Won't you wake me when it's done? When it's done. 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 When it's done.
That was Ani DiFranco right here on Livewire. Her album, Revolutionary Love, is out now. And she's got a new children's book coming out this month called The Knowing. So check that out as well. All right, that's going to do it for this special episode of Livewire this week. A huge thanks to our guests, Jamie Loftus, Silvia Vasquez-Lavado, and Ani DiFranco. Livewire is brought to you in part by Alaska Airlines.
Laura Haddon is our executive producer. Heather D. Michelle is our executive director. Our producer and editor is Melanie Sevchenko. Our assistant editor is Trey Hester. Our marketing manager is Paige Thomas. Our production fellow is Tanvi Kumar. And Yasmin Median is our intern. Our house band is Ethan Fox Tucker, Sam Tucker, A.L. Alves, and A. Walker Spring, who also composes our music. Molly Pettit is our technical director and mixer, and our house sound is by D. Neil Blake.
Additional funding provided by the Oregon Arts Commission, a state agency funded by the state of Oregon and the National Endowment for the Arts. Livewire was created by Robin Tenenbaum and Kate Sokoloff. This week, we'd like to thank members Josh O'Rourke, Portland, Oregon, and Manuel Galaviz of Vancouver, Washington. For more information about our show or how you can listen to our podcast, ski-daddle on over to livewireradio.org. I'm Luke Burbank for Elena Passarello and the whole Livewire crew. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.